Everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Time for Impact podcast. Before we get into the podcast proper, I just wanted to remind listeners that there is very few weeks left now until our special event between myself at Time for Impact, Rob Jackson from Rob Jackson Consulting, and Helen Timbrell. We are running, I think, is a unique or certainly a very unusual event for HR professionals who are increasingly taking on responsibility for volunteering functions within charities and other organisations. Whilst they're taking on that responsibility, often HR professionals have not been given much support and training in this area, and we felt that was important that we provided some help, a nice, safe, collaborative environment where we can explore the challenges and the advantages of combining HR and volunteering where that happens, so that it's successful for members of staff and for volunteers and everybody alike. Ultimately, we want this to be a success where it happens. So if you're an HR professional or if you're a volunteering professional and know HR professionals who you think would value an opportunity to explore these issues, please do put them towards our event, which is called Realising Potential Collaboration in HR and Volunteering. You can find details on my website or on my LinkedIn page, and equally on the websites and pages of Rob Jackson and Helen Timbrell. So enough of that, and on to the podcast properly. I hope you enjoy. Big welcome to you all for this latest edition of the Time for Impact podcast. So on today's podcast, we're very lucky to be joined by Kishma from the Wellcome Trust. Hi, Kishma.
Chris, how are you?
We're good. Yeah, I was almost going to say it's a balmy evening here in Oxfordshire, but that's probably pushing it a little bit too far. I wonder if you would like to tell us a little bit about, I'm hoping that people know who the Wellcome Trust are, but some people won't. But tell us about the Trust, tell us about your role, and in particular, your role in terms of your involvement with volunteering in the organisation.
So I work for, as you said, the Wellcome Trust. We go by just Wellcome now, but I don't think that's enough for most people. They're a bit like, we need more than that. So it is Wellcome, formerly known as the Wellcome Trust, and we are a global research funder. For those who aren't in the research space or medical field, most people know us through the Wellcome Collection, which is our free museum, which is all about the human health and experience. And then the Trust itself is, as I said, a global funder focusing on four areas at the moment, which is mental health, climate and health, discovery research, and infectious diseases. And we are an organisation of around 1,000 people based in London. And my is volunteering manager, and I always feel like that should actually have corporate in front of it. It doesn't, but I feel like it should, because I am a corporate volunteering manager. So we are not a volunteer involving organisation, although I think sometimes takes people by surprise, because we do have the museum, and more often than not, museums are kind of held up by their volunteers, but Wellcome is not one of those organisations. We are a very unique organisation. We are a registered charity because of the collection, but we are the third richest charity in the world, last time I checked. So not like a regular charity by any stretch of the imagination. When people walk into a 9-story building in the middle of central London, they're like, this is nothing like my regular charity that I go to. And having worked for some of those regular smaller charities, I appreciate that. We are very different, but we all are all about having a positive impact in the world and making change. My role is to facilitate volunteering and social action activities and opportunities for the staff at Wellcome. I feel like it's quite a unique role in that lots of organisations have volunteering days. So at Wellcome, everyone has 2 volunteering days by default, regardless of how many hours they work, and those run as per the calendar year. Lots of organisations do that, but this is the first organisation I've found where there is actually someone who is organising the volunteering for people to use their volunteering allowance for, which I think is an amazing idea, to be honest. I do obviously volunteer myself. I'd be a terrible volunteer manager if I didn't volunteer. I have 3 volunteer roles at the moment. So something like volunteering allowance is fantastic for someone like me who already has volunteering commitments and gets to use it. Great. Actually, loads of people don't have regular volunteering commitments, and in reality, using 2 random days is actually quite hard if you don't already volunteer and you don't have links with community organisations to just get told, hey, you have 2 or 3 days to volunteer, and you're like, okay, well, where do I start? What do I do? I feel like that can be quite overwhelming. Often say that volunteering falls into what I call the black hole of apathy, which is kind of a set of things where people want to do, but they just don't get round to it because something else gets in the way. So it's the same thing with, like, taking stuff to the charity shop, blood donation, putting yourself down on the organ donor register, all of these things which are great in theory, but people just never get round to doing. And volunteering is often one of those things. So my job is to bridge that gap between the desire to volunteer and actually getting down to it. So the majority of my role, which sits within the wellbeing team, which is quite unusual again, but it makes sense in the corporate volunteering sense. So we are not focused on a corporate social responsibility angle or anything like that. But Wellcome isn't an organisation that needs to assuage any guilt for any things that it's doing, which I feel a lot of people have CSR policies for. We don't need to do that. Our volunteering is angled at employee well-being, and I feel like I need a better strapline than doing good feels good, but that's essentially what volunteering is about. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but volunteering is good for you. There are lots of studies. It's not just, our personal opinion that volunteering is good for you. There are plenty of studies that prove all the different ways that it is beneficial for the volunteer as much as the recipient. So at Wellcome, it sits within the wellbeing team.
I'd like to unpick some of those issues that you raised, but before we do, what was your route into volunteering? Did you come from a sort of traditional volunteer management background, or did you come more from the sort of corporate side of Wellcome?
No, it's a traditional volunteering background. So I've been in volunteer management maybe 6 years, and I came into that via human resources, and I just discovered volunteer management one day, and I was like, wow, this is all the good bits of HR without none of the bits I don't like. Want some more of this, please? And it took me a little while to get into volunteer management, and I started with an organisation that is now called Kinship. At the time I was there, they were called Grandparents Plus, and they're a kinship care charity, which is an incredible organisation. And then after there, I spent a couple of years at the Children's Society as a volunteer engagement manager and then a volunteer development manager. And then I've taken this role on at Wellcome as the volunteering manager here, which is a very different side to the coin, to be honest. Enjoyable and rewarding in different ways. But yeah, very, very different, because a lot of the challenges of being a volunteering involving organisation aren't something that I have to circumvent anymore. There are completely different challenges, but for the most part, a very, very rewarding role.
And that uniqueness is part of the reason why we asked you onto the podcast, of course. Uniqueness, but also looking at volunteering from a corporate or an employer's perspective is really I think is really important to our listeners. And I don't think you'll be alone. I would subscribe to that feeling of finding out that volunteering is like the HR but without all the bad bits or all the good parts added in. So Kishma, I think it's really interesting that you're in the wellbeing team, and we probably could debate the pros and cons of that as long as we wanted. What I'm particularly interested in is the benefits of involving your employees in volunteering. I'm hoping you can tell us a bit about things that I'm hoping many of our listeners already know about the wellbeing aspects, but also I imagine there are issues around morale, productivity, skills and learning that are hugely beneficial to you as an employer, as well as to the organisations that they're volunteering their time for. So yeah, be interested to hear an employer's viewpoint on some of that.
Yeah, so at the moment we don't do a lot of recording of, there's not a lot of formal recording on the positive impact that the volunteering has. I do a few feedback surveys and ask people how the volunteering impacts their personal well-being, and that ranges, but for the vast majority of people it's always that it's had a hugely positive impact on their well-being. And there are some questions I ask around how people feel to work at an organisation that offers this kind of volunteering, and that is always very positively scored as well. Maybe a little unusually for a corporate volunteering scheme is that at the moment we don't do any skills-based volunteering. It is entirely physical volunteering at the moment. I'm moving into skills-based volunteering, but I'm finding a few challenges around that. One is just a really practical challenge around skills-based volunteering, which is that the system that we use to record our volunteering doesn't record in hours. And there is a kind of disconnect, chopping your volunteering allowance into hours on a system that doesn't record into hours. So if you're not able to record that you're taking an hour at a time, then it becomes messy, I suppose, for want of a better term. So there is that on a practical issue. But actually, I'm finding that on another practical issue is that whenever we do speak to organisations with skills-based volunteering, there is a lot of vagueness in terms of what skills they would actually like. And people get quite excited about the prospect of somewhere like Wellcome, where there is such an amazing range of skills and abilities, but they are finding it quite difficult to actually drill down for what they're asking for. We did trial it with some data-led volunteering. That wasn't successful, but we're working on some new ideas of getting out some skills-based volunteering across the organisation. But that's very much a work in progress. I was going to say earlier that the way that we do volunteering at Wellcome is in 3 chunks. So we do something that we call volunteering seasons. So we've just finished something called Community Action, which was 15 volunteering events that took place over 10 days. So I organised all of the different events, and then people sign up to do those. They were, for the vast majority, physical. We do have one skills-based, which was the Gadget Clinic with Age UK, and a couple of others that were somewhere in between skills-based and physical volunteering, because the enormous glaring downside with physical volunteering is that it's not particularly accessible or inclusive. So we don't want to create lots of volunteering opportunities that lots of people can't participate in. So we do a big range of activities, and then people sign up. We also do a very traditional day, which is the strategy team, for example, would like to do volunteering, and they ask me to find something, and they give me a time and a date, and I go off and do it. And then lastly, we also encourage individual volunteering, but the way that I do that is via a volunteering festival that I hold annually, and I invite different organisations into Wellcome to pitch So lots of opportunities introduced that way. But I think actually the physical volunteering is really, really popular. I know that there's lots of benefits for Wellcome if we did skills-based volunteering, but what's quite nice with the volunteering at Wellcome is that Wellcome isn't too concerned about what Wellcome get out of it. It's very much for the staff benefit. And, and with the physical volunteering, there is still skills development. It's just not skills that people would be using for Wellcome. So one of the charities we work with for community action is called Your Bike Project. So it's a community project where people donate bikes and then they're upcycled and then given back out into the community. So yes, they learnt some skills. Can they use them at Wellcome? Probably not. But knowing to fix their bikes gives a sense of satisfaction, and the impact that we're able to have on the community gives a sense of satisfaction as well. Just two very different types, but kind of, I suppose, the ideal in what we're looking for, something for the volunteers and something for the communities, is kind of what we would like to get out of the volunteering. And I think for the most part we get that. It's just, and then Wellcome's benefit is happier, healthier staff who feel like, hey, this is really cool that I work for a place that does this and actually cares about our communities. We used to use a broker to find our volunteering opportunities. I have removed the broker and I do all of the volunteering arrangements myself. And that's partially because I want to have those relationships with those communities and develop those properly rather than using a third party to put them in place. So we get to go back to certain communities year after year and see the impact of our relationship.
And I imagine, it's really nice that Wellcome are clearly not in the world of volunteer washing, to use the jargon, using volunteering as a way of improving their image. Hopefully you don't need to. But there are those benefits, and you mentioned the morale and so on. But I imagine it probably has an impact on retention, on recruitment, certainly on happiness and productivity, probably therefore in your organisation. And equally in a world where people are increasingly browsing careers and moving from not just one organisation to another, but one career to another more than they ever did. Actually, things like that, which I suppose people are much more interested in working for organisations that have the right kind of culture and ethos and the right social credentials. And it's got to stand Wellcome in really good stead to be in that frame, I would have thought.
I guess I'm interested in volunteering in the context of sort of a package of kind of wellbeing interventions for sort of staff at an organisation, and what makes volunteering kind of special and unique as part of that. And I guess I can only sort of speak to kind of my own experience on this, but volunteering, particularly what I'd call some more of the sort of the team day models, if that makes sense, is often feels like one of those things that you sort of do together. And whether there's a certain power in sort of collective well-being rather than individual well-being that you might get through, I don't know, a mindfulness session or other interventions that you see in that space, whether there's something in the power of doing this together for employees and achieving something together in a way that they don't really get to do in other interventions. And I'd be interested if that's something you've either seen or witnessed or you've heard played back in your volunteering programs.
That is a huge part of the volunteering seasons, having a cross Wellcome interaction, because there's 1,000 people at Wellcome, so it's a lot of us, and there's not, you often just kind of work within certain streams and you don't get to interact with the vast majority of the organisation. But these volunteering days mean that anyone can sign up for them, so you get to cross paths with people that you didn't get to cross paths with, and there is still very much the team working element with the physical, especially with the physical volunteering days, because it takes a whole team to. I think last week we went to Loughborough Community Centre and we needed to move 2 tons of sand. It's not a one person job, so there's a whole different type of collaboration and team building skills with a brand new set of people. but it definitely is a huge part of making Wellcome feel not quite like home, but fostering those relationships, to just fostering relationships through volunteering that just enhance your overall experience at work. Because doing a team day is great, but it is within your own team. But there's so many people I've met through doing the volunteering this way, and then you go and get a coffee or do something else, or turn up to a meeting where you don't actually know anyone and think, oh, actually I do recognize you because you were on the volunteering thing I did last year. And it creates a whole new avenue and a new branch of networking and relationships and all the sorts of things that you wouldn't have necessarily got if you weren't being encouraged to volunteer across the organisation.
Those that know me know that I'm really passionate about the power of volunteering to benefit the individual who is giving their time, as well as the organisation they're giving their time for. That kind of dual impact of volunteering, I think, is so important. And what I really like about what you're describing to me at the Wellcome Trust sounds like, you're really capitalizing on that aspect. This is volunteering in a way where everyone benefits, and particularly your employees, through the collective endeavour, through the impact they make. All of that kind of stuff sounds brilliant. I guess to change gear a little bit, it's interesting to me about your sort of moving away from the broker, trying to engage with the partners yourself. So I'm a sort of professional, a volunteering professional in the charity sector at the moment. I'm really interested from your perspective, like what makes a good partner when you're looking at corporate volunteering in this way. What do I need to be thinking about to be able to engage you and organisations like you, maybe?
I think I'm going to say two things that are probably opposite ends of the spectrum. But the main thing that I think is a really good partnership is being really clear on your ask. And I think sometimes people seem to be a bit afraid to say we can or we can't do this. I think actually, as the organisation, you should absolutely be clear on what you would like or what you need as an organisation, because then I can decide if that works for me, and then I can. And for the most part, if I reached out to an organisation, it's because I think there is something valuable there and there is something I want to get involved in. So I'm happy to take that in whatever form it comes. They just need to be clear on what it is so I can find out where it fits as part of the greater scheme of things. I think giving people a range of opportunities and just saying this is and not doing things because you want the fundraising income that comes with a corporate partnership, paying for people to be there. I've noticed that is incredibly important to everyone who volunteers at Wellcome, is the impact. We don't do stuff just for the sake of doing stuff. They're not interested in just filling some time. The benefit comes from knowing that there are communities on the other end of what they're doing that will benefit from their involvement in a particular project. So being really clear on the ask, I think, is the number one thing. Having a clear structure of pricing, of activities, of how everything will work. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the willingness to collaborate with us and create something brand new. I think that is a really exciting space to be in, that we could create something unique to us. We did something similar with one of our organisations, with Garden. I mentioned about the difficulty I have in finding accessible group volunteering activities. And this was for our festive giving period. And they suggested wreath making, and they brought everything to us. So we did wreath making in the office. This year I will be putting down tarp because I was vacuuming up pine needles for about an hour after that. But otherwise, it was a fantastic event inside the office. It lasted a couple of hours. So People didn't have to travel. It didn't take a lot of time out of their day. You could do it whilst you were seated. People got to take one wreath home, and then the other two went back to the organisation to sell. It was great, and we just collaborated on that together to make it happen. So that was really exciting. And going forward, where there are partnerships and someone's not afraid to say, "How about this?" And as long as that "how about this" is followed by an actual plan, then that's great.
Is the onus really on the charities to be both creative but also kind of really specific about what this looks like? And I know you say you don't do skills-based volunteering, but I know you have some ambitions perhaps to do more of that in the future, and it seems a missed opportunity from a charity perspective not to be able to tap into the huge talented skill space that you have at your disposal. But the onus, it feels to me, is on the charities to say, well, actually, this is the skill set I'm looking for. This is how we would host the individuals, what I'm looking for, what the outcomes look like, how we're going to measure it. A little bit more specificity about that. And I often think, Matt, you work for the M&D Association, and I remember the partnerships there with some of the tech companies, Google's and so on. I don't think they would have called that volunteering. But what was really interesting was how the organisation was able to tap in to the combined technical knowledge of people like Google, pose them a challenge that people with M&D needed, and ask them to come away back with some solutions. It wasn't always done in volunteering times, but the concept there seems to be a parallel to me that you're an organisation that has all those brilliantly talented individuals, and I'm sure both as individuals and group would love to be involved in solving some more technical challenges, but it does need a bit of imagination on behalf of the charity partner to actually be really clear about what they want. I'd be interested to hear your views on how this might start to progress, or what your vision is in terms of really tapping into those skills, or are you happy just to keep it, just be useful where you can?
That's a really difficult one. I feel like with that, I'm definitely willing to explore whatever comes up. It's a tricky one. I feel like I always use the expression, it's a bit chicken and egg, because yes, we are a huge organisation with lots of skills, but there is no guarantee that the particular skill set that somebody is after will come forward to volunteer for what they would like. But I do think it's at least worth the ask to propose something. I think Wellcome is quite different in that, and I have no idea if this was the situation at Google, but I am aware that some organisations have more of a voluntold rather than a volunteer kind of model, which is perhaps how they're able to harness these volunteers, because the volunteers don't really have a choice, whereas at Wellcome it's very much a voluntary situation. And so it's not possible for me to guarantee anything. All I can do is try, so we can work together and develop a role, and I can put it out to a group of people, but it's very much, let's see what works. But I think a lot of it is a matter of time. There is definitely things and areas in Wellcome that it's apparent certain things touch people a lot more. So if I put on any kind of volunteering that involves animals, that will fill up in an instant. Pretty much anything with children will fill up within an instant. And a lot of the creative things are very popular as well. So it's just about kind of finding the perfect volunteering opportunity that covers all of the things that people are interested in, and a volunteering organisation that has those needs. But I think we're talking a lot about the corporate aspect in terms of the formalised relationship that we have with an organisation to send groups of volunteers into an organisation to do something. But the thing that I would encourage organisations to do is actually the individual roles, because there are lots of organisations where group volunteering isn't necessarily suitable because of the nature of their work. And we are a focused audience. And if you're able to come in and present or do something, then that's 1,000 people that you are able to reach, who will have all of those skills. So it doesn't necessarily. So I think with, you mentioned about what organizations can do with corporates. I think more than just the corporate volunteering relationship, and think about all of the people within that organization that you could work with on an individual basis. So even if you don't have a relationship with Wellcome as an organization, you could still end up working with 5 Wellcome employees as volunteers on an individual basis at the weekend. I kind of see volunteering days as almost like a Groupon for volunteering. It's a great way to give people a taster and then get them hooked, and then they come back for more. And we've had people do that with our organisations. They've enjoyed volunteering on the community action day so much. They're like, sign me up. I'm coming back to do this in my free time. So I think that is really valuable, like maximise that relationship, not necessarily the Wellcome relationship, but the Wellcome employees relationship in this audience that you have access to.
I think that idea of like volunteering habits is really important. And, we've talked in other podcasts about some of the different interventions in different in people's lives, I suppose, which might create that sort of spark for a volunteering habit. It might be interventions as a young person. I guess there is another kind of opportunity here for people in the workplace, if corporate volunteering days are executed right, for this not just to be a 2 days a year thing or a 1 day a year thing or whatever, or just moving a pile of sand or painting a building or doing some gardening, but is actually this really important opportunity to establish a sort of lasting relationship with a cause. And I guess there's real potential for people in the volunteering sector, if they're arranging and organising these kind of corporate days, which is not just thinking about the task in hand, but how they can create that lasting habit as part of that experience, right? Is that something generally you are finding people do stick around? People find that it's good for them and they want to do more of it?
100%. That is a big thing. And my favourite bits of feedback are, there are 2 types. One, people who started with the organisation during the corporate volunteering day and then have maintained that relationship outside of that. And then I also have volunteers who can't maintain that relationship because that organisation is based in London and they don't live in London, but then have gone back into their local community and then found a volunteering opportunity to pick up. Yes, that is the ultimate goal, because what we can achieve on the day is amazing. If we go to our local food bank, we literally move tons of food on that day, and it's a huge benefit to that organisation. But actually that long-lasting regular volunteering, or even if it's not regular as in on a weekly basis, but if every Christmas you are now helping out at your local food bank, or you are now coordinating the toy collection for your local children's centre or something like that, it has woken that part of you up, then that is the best thing that can come out of my role. And it does happen. And I love that for me and for the organisations and for the volunteers. Volunteering is not a thing that people regret. No one kind of spends a day at a food bank and thinks, oh no, I shouldn't have, that was a waste of my time. That's not a thing, But sometimes it's just bringing people along, getting people involved. And that's why now we've started adapting the types of volunteering we do and making them shorter, inside the building, less far away, all of these different things that work for different people. A lot of people do want to go in and dig a hole because they're not looking at a spreadsheet. And I think what I'm trying to work on at the moment is explaining to people why things like digging a hole or putting sand in a sandpit is important, because those jobs need to be done in order for those organisations to provide their full service. But they're not the best use of the skills of those charities. We can fill those things in, and then the subject matter experts can spend their time doing the things that they are best at, serving their community in the best way. So it's this trying to show people that it's a joint effort, and that these things, although they seem really mundane, are incredibly valuable for a variety of reasons. And that's part of the reason why we choose the organisations we work with quite carefully, and we choose small grassroots organisations, places that aren't coming up on the first 2 or 3 pages of a Google search, because our impact can go so much further. And I'm really enjoying the relationship we are building with a lot of our organisations now as well.
I think what you just said there, Kishma, makes me think a little bit about, I guess, us sort of collectively as volunteering involving organisations, that, this idea that someone might do some volunteering somewhere and then go back to their local community, or they might do some volunteering somewhere as part of an employee day, or they might do some volunteering for any organisation. It just makes me think we've got this kind of collective responsibility as volunteering involving organisations to make sure, I feel at least, that those experiences and the experience people have of volunteering are really good, positive, constructive ones, that volunteering feels inclusive, it feels meaningful, it feels welcoming, it feels achievable for people. Because that, I guess, to me, it feels like, coming back to what you said earlier on, like it feels to me like that's the antidote to the sort of black hole of apathy, as it were, which is actually, if we can give someone a good experience, hopefully they don't, hopefully that experience is good enough to counter that black hole of apathy, that it means they want to not just volunteer for one day, but they want to be an active citizen somehow in their local community. And that might be with an organisation, it might be more informal volunteering where they help other people, it might be through mutual aid, it might be whatever, but it feels to me like this is such an important potential sort of trigger point for people sort of developing that habit. And so there's such an onus on us that is a good experience, and also maybe an onus on employers, coming back to another thing you said, which I think has really stuck with me, which is that this is truly voluntary. We're not forcing people to dig a hole in the cold against their will, kind of thing, because that's putting people off volunteering, like if it's a really bad experience. So it feels to me there's so many important things on both sides of this sort of corporate volunteering side. Is like, one, organizations make that experience an amazing experience because it helps all of us create active citizens. Employee involved in organizations, don't force people to volunteer. Don't create your own version of sort of national service in your organizations, because this, first of all, it's not volunteering, and secondly, you're potentially putting people off something that could be a really great thing.
I often hear people say, there are only so many walls that need painting and there's so many holes in the ground that need digging. And I understand that viewpoint. But I do think there's no onus on us as volunteer professionals to maybe think of other things we need doing. But even if it is a painted wall or a hole in the ground or a sand pit, there's something about awareness raising. Because although that person may come along and give you 2 days of their time or 1 day of their time, and you may even question whether that was what you wanted. But what you've done, and I'm always saying this to volunteer managers anyway, is their job is to build communities of supporters. People are going to engage and build an affinity with your cause. And if coming along and painting a wall or painting a building for a couple of days builds a relationship between you and that individual, which lasts way beyond Wellcome's employment with them, perhaps, then you've done something really good. You've got a supporter who's going to give money, he's going to talk to their friends about what a great organisation you are, and maybe they'll come back and volunteer in other ways. So I always want to encourage volunteer professionals just to think beyond the immediate and think about the bigger picture, just as you would if it's a fundraiser. So I think there's huge value in just building a rapport with both organisations and their communities, which are their employees, and grasp the opportunity with both hands and get engaged. So I don't know, maybe that's a cue, Kishma, for you to tell us how charities can get in touch with you and get involved.
anyone's welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via Wellcome, and I'm more than happy to take all different types of volunteering. The more opportunities I have, the more people I can get involved. And yeah, that's essentially it. So then when I am talking to someone about volunteering and they say, oh no, I can't, I've got the kids. I'm like, this one takes kids. I can't, I've got the dog. This one takes dogs. Oh, I'm only free on every third Blue Wednesday. I actually have an organization that only operates, on the third Blue Wednesday. So there's something for everybody. The biggest spectrum of volunteering opportunities I can build, whether it's one-off at your annual festival or weekly at your community centre or whatever it is, then I'm more than happy to involve as many organisations as possible. There does need to be some crossover with Wellcome's organisational objectives, but as I said, they're pretty broad. They're very inclusive. The only thing that we can't do is a pure animal charity, but there needs to be some synergy with what we're doing as an organisation. And even if there isn't any opportunities for group volunteering, then I still would like to hear from organisations that have any kind of volunteering, because like I said, I'd like to encourage that volunteering on an individual basis. So whether it's coming in on an awareness day to give us a talk about your organisation, what you do and how people can get involved, or coming into the volunteering festival and speaking to people face to face, engaging with people that way, then all of those things are valuable. And you said something there, Chris, about the awareness raising piece of volunteering, and I think that's so huge. When I used to work for Kinship, I was really keen on getting engagement volunteers, and my big thing is people can't advocate for something that they don't know exists. And there are so many causes, so many charities that people have never heard of, just because we all have a limited amount of bandwidth, and there are half a dozen charities we could all name off the top of our head, and then so many more we've never heard of. So even if your interaction with us doesn't result in volunteers, that doesn't mean it doesn't gain supporters or people who can speak about your charity, signpost, anything like that. So it's always worthwhile, in my opinion, with so many people. Use all of these corporates. If volunteer involving organisations tapped into all of the corporate partners or companies around them, then I think we could do huge things.
So we have listeners on the podcast from all across the world, not just here in the UK. And so I suppose it would be useful, Kishma, just to clarify where you are seeking charity partnerships from. Is it just UK and London, or are you looking further afield?
Definitely not London based. It would be national charities, because I'm mindful that a lot of our employees aren't based in London, so it's frustrating for them when I'm constantly talking about London. So charities that have a national base are really, really helpful. Charities that have an online presence, yes. Charities that registered in the UK is probably the best bet at the moment. Hopefully next time we catch up, I can tell you about this great global plan that I've embarked on to volunteer all across the world.
Fantastic. Well, that's great, and it's good to hear, and people know how to contact you, and they can always get in touch through Time for Impact, and I can pass people over as well. So yeah, thank you ever so much for spending a bit of your evening talking to us, and good luck with what you're doing next, and it'd be nice to hear how you get on with the next stages of your work as they develop. Thanks very much, Kishma.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was so nice to hear Kishma's perspective on some of this thing. I think you and I probably thought we were going to hear a lot more about skills volunteering, and I suspect that Kishma and team have wanted themselves to see a lot more of that, and it perhaps shows the difficulty it is to create some of those opportunities, especially when you're trying to do it for a large number of employees, and perhaps put some of the onus onto us as charity leaders to get our heads together to come up with some of those solutions. Well, Kishma's really spelt out to me that even if it's not skills-based volunteering, there's real value in engaging employees in your charity or your cause and getting them involved in your work from a much wider perspective and a longer lasting relationship. I wonder what your thoughts are and maybe how we might engender more skills-based volunteering as well, Matt, in other organisations, and how the sector can help organisations like Wellcome do a bit more of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I'd prepared in this by really thinking hard about skills-based volunteering, and it seems to be that is, I'm looking here at some figures, around 6 million people, about 21% of the workforce, are putting their work skills into use on a voluntary basis, and a further 50% would like to volunteer using their occupational professional skills. That's from the Vision for Volunteering, right? And some of their statistics. And it seems to be this kind of skills-based volunteering is, from some of our other more recent podcasts, there's this trend that skills-based volunteering is on the rise, where perhaps more other traditional kind of forms of volunteering are not at the moment. Having said that, I'm in sort of very much in reflective mode after this podcast, because I think what I've heard here is, I suppose, there's real power in the more traditional corporate volunteering opportunities too. We shouldn't forget about that. And there's a really important opportunity for making those meaningful and powerful and sort of catalysts for longer term volunteering habits for some people. Like they're a way to make connections with causes, to make connections with communities, to make connections with other people who already have a volunteering habit and can understand how they can sort of fit that into their lives, and I guess to experience the benefits of how it feels when you achieve something really meaningful collectively and individually through volunteering. And I guess it also has impressed the importance to me on the need to, as organizations that design this kind of stuff, that we need to think carefully about this, and we need to make sure that they're really good, because this could be a really important opportunity for someone. It could be a sort of make or break about what they think about volunteering. On the skills front, I guess my reflection on that is maybe we've all got more work to do on that, to think about how we make that and we create those kind of opportunities so we can maybe get more of a balance in that space. Because I guess for everyone that takes real joy in painting a wall or digging a hole, there will also be someone who takes real joy and meaning in using their professional skills to make a difference as well. And it feels to me sometimes those kind of opportunities are harder, but they're just as meaningful. Like, where are our hackathons? Where are our collaborative innovation opportunities, problem solving, the sort of, short-term skills-based stuff as well? That's exciting, but perhaps we have more work to do to design those kind of things.
I've done them myself, mate, in the past, and they do take a lot of work. I won't know the charities, but I remember working with Halfords to get their young graduate trainees to volunteer and help a charity rethink their offering from a younger perspective. Brilliant. I worked with BT to get them to help a charity's HR department to redo their, I think it was their performance management system. Sounds really, really difficult, really challenging, but actually, of course, BT have got a great HR department, so it was great to be able to use those. But it does take a lot of planning and organisation, and as Kishma said, a lot of precise thinking to go to a corporate organisation and say, this is what I need and what I want. These are the kind of people I'm looking for, etc. Just as we would if we were looking for a fundraising opportunity or a fundraising partnership with a corporate. Actually, we need to go into this really thinking this thing through very, very carefully if we want to get good results. So, yes. Well, that's. I feel that the conversation might go on and on and on, and maybe we'll have other guests who want to come on and talk about these kind of subjects and take us in a different direction. If you'd be interested, we'd certainly love to hear from you. In the meantime, should say as always, if you want to get in touch, the email's always the same: podcast@timeforimpact.co.uk. Do follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and other platforms are available, and do rate us if you get an opportunity. But until next time, thanks ever so much, Kishma, and thanks, Matt, for chatting. and we'll speak again.
Thanks, everyone. Speak soon.